Imagine you are walking through a valley that does not yet have a name. The year is 11,400 years before the world will think to start counting. There are no cities, no roads, no fields, just a stretch of land running south of a vast lake, flanked by hills that catch the morning fog. You are not a farmer. You do not even know what a farmer is. The word does not exist yet. But something is about to happen here, in this narrow valley between the Jordan River and the hills of the Levant, that will change the entire direction of the human story. You are going to plant something, not because anyone told you to, not because you had a plan. You're going to plant something because you saw a tree, and that tree was different from every other tree in the valley, and you were paying close enough attention to notice. This is the story of the very first crop ancient humans ever grew, and it was not wheat. It was not barley. It was not rice or corn. It was a fig. Before we get there, you need to understand what the world looked like in the period leading up to this moment. The part of the Middle East known today as the Levant was one of the most naturally productive landscapes on Earth during the early Holocene. Springs ran freely from limestone hillsides. Rivers flooded seasonally, depositing rich silt across flat plains. Wild grasses, nut trees, and fruit trees covered the slopes. Human beings had lived here for hundreds of thousands of years, moving through this landscape as hunter-gatherers, following herds and seasons, never staying long enough to watch a plant grow from a cutting to a tree. Then, roughly 23,000 years ago, a group of those hunter-gatherers stopped moving. At a campsite on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, at a site archaeologists now call Ohalo II, they built brush huts and stayed. When the site was discovered in 1989, exposed by a severe drought that dropped the lake's water level by 9 meters, researchers recovered more than 150,000 preserved plant remains. Professor Ehud Weiss of Bar-Ilan University identified over 140 different plant species, including wild emmer wheat, wild barley, and wild oats. But the most significant find was something that should not have been there at all: proto-weeds, plants that thrive only in disturbed, cultivated soil. Finding them at a 23,000-year-old site meant these people were not just gathering randomly. They were tending patches of ground, returning to the same spots, shaping the landscape in small but deliberate ways. They were not farmers, but they were no longer purely wanderers either. The story of the first true cultivated crop begins a few thousand years later, and about 50 kilometers to the south, in the lower Jordan Valley. The site is called Gilgal I. It was excavated from 1973 onward by archaeologist Tamar Noy of the Israel Museum. It was a small, pre-pottery Neolithic village, a permanent settlement of people who built structures, stored food, and were beginning to imagine life beyond the next season. The village sat near a freshwater spring, with the Jordan River to the east and forested hills to the west. Wild fig trees grew along the stream banks and hillsides, as they had for thousands of years. The people of Gilgal ate wild figs regularly, rich in natural sugars, easy to eat without cooking, and dense in calories. Figs were one of the most reliable foods the landscape offered. But the wild fig is, botanically, one of the stranger objects in nature. What you call a fig is not technically a fruit. It is an inverted flower, a hollow structure containing hundreds of tiny blossoms on its interior surface. In wild figs, those flowers can only be pollinated by a single species of tiny wasp, the Blastophaga scenes, which crawls inside, pollinates the flowers, lays its eggs, and dies within the fig. Without that wasp, a wild fig cannot produce seeds. Without the fig, the wasp cannot reproduce. It is one of the oldest and most tightly locked partnerships in the natural world. Now here is where the story changes. In rare cases, a genetic mutation can occur in a fig tree that breaks that partnership entirely. The mutation is called parthenocarpy, from the Greek for virgin fruit. A parthenocarpic fig tree produces fruit without any pollination at all. No wasp required. The figs simply grow, ripen, and stay on the branch. They become softer, sweeter, more concentrated in flavor than any wild fig. And because they are not dropping early, they dry beautifully on the branch in the hot valley air, becoming a calorie-dense food that can be stored for months. There is one catch. Parthenocarpic figs contain no seeds. The tree is a genetic dead end. It cannot reproduce on its own. In nature, every time this mutation appeared, it died with the tree that carried it. Until someone noticed. The people of Gilgal I were not passive eaters. They were observers with generations of intimate plant knowledge. When someone found a fig tree producing larger, softer, sweeter, seedless fruit, they paid attention. They realized something. This tree could not reproduce itself. But they also knew something else. A fig branch, pushed into damp soil near a spring, will grow roots. It will become a new tree. And that tree will produce the same extraordinary fruit. So they took a cutting. They pushed it into the ground. They watered it from the spring. And they waited. That act, breathtakingly simple, was the first intentional cultivation of a plant in the known history of the world. When Professor Ofer Bar Yosef of Harvard University and his colleagues Mordecai Kislev and Anat Hartman of Bar Ilan University published their findings in the journal Science in 2006, the evidence was unambiguous. 9 whole carbonized figs and 313 smaller fig fragments recovered from the burned floor of a house at Gilgal 1, dating to 11,400 years ago. Every single fragment was a cenocarp, a structure produced without fertilization. Not wild figs gathered from the hillside, cultivated figs deliberately propagated by human hands. At a second site called Netiv Hagdud, just 1.5 kilometers away, the same parthenocarpic variety appeared, 2 settlements sharing the same cultivated variety, evidence of a practice already spreading between communities. Bar Yosef described what this represented with a phrase that became foundational in the archaeology of agriculture. 11,000 years ago, he wrote, there was a critical switch in the human mind from exploiting the earth as it is to actively changing the environment to suit our needs. The fig was where that switch was first thrown. And consider what choosing the fig required. You plant a cutting. You do not eat from it for years. You are investing in a harvest that is seasons away. That is not the behavior of someone surviving day to day. That is the behavior of someone who has begun to imagine the future and decided to act on it. Every cultivated fig tree growing anywhere in the world today, in Turkey, Spain, California, India, carries the genetic signature of those first parthenocarpic trees propagated in the Jordan Valley 11,000 years ago. Because cultivated figs do not grow from seeds, they grow from cuttings. The same method, passed hand to hand across 11 millennia through every civilization that has risen and fallen since. You have almost certainly eaten a fig grown from a direct descendant of the world's first crop. The next time you do, think about the person in that valley beside that spring, who took a branch from a tree that made something sweeter than nature had planned, who pushed it into the soil, who waited. They did not know what they were starting. They did not know the word agriculture. They just knew the fruit was good, and they wanted more of it. That was enough to change the world. That branch is now in the ground. The cutting has been planted, but planting was only the first step. In part 2, you will discover exactly how ancient humans turned that single branch into a living, growing, harvested crop, and built the entire foundation of human farming from the soil up.